Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition. Yes, it is actually Friday. It's the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. It's all crazy today, folks. Crazy, crazy, and crazy martinis, all of it related to the Ford Kavanaugh controversy, which we'll get to in a moment. For right now, you have to imagine me with my notepad in my office chair with Jim on the couch. It's a little bit of therapy time here, as Jim's worst fears came true. He predicted it in the Jolt yesterday that the Jets would lose and Cleveland would get their first win since 2016, since the Obama administration, and it indeed happened with Baker Mayfield coming in and providing the comeback. So, Jim, how are you today? Our listeners definitely want to know.
As they say in the GIF, not great, Bob. No, I'm deeply frustrated, Greg. As you could tell from my prediction the day before, I had sneaking fears that the Jets would be the team to break the non-victory streak. I'm sure the Pittsburgh Steelers fans are feeling every bit as frustrated by the tie, but I'll spare listeners a good 3 to 4 hour rant about Coach Todd Bowles. All credit to the Cleveland Browns. Between this, they nearly beat New Orleans. They are a much better team than last year. They have a lot of excitement to look forward to in the years to come with Baker Mayfield. He really did look like he's living up to the hype last night. You know, Greg, if you're going to score a touchdown, you probably don't want to mimic wiping your butt with the football. I had a good talk with my sons about sportsmanship. I also pointed out to them, because my sons were deeply disappointed. They don't get to stay up late for the night game, so they wake up and they find out, the Jets lost. I can't believe it. And I said to them, if they had been in that situation, I think they would have done better. They're like, no, Dad. I said, no. If you were in a situation where there were 11 men trying to kill you and you had to get to the end zone to be safe, and oh, by the way, if you succeed, you will get paid millions of dollars. You would either succeed or you would die trying. And so I just kind of had a deep frustration with how flat the Jets played, dumb mistakes, dumb penalties, stuff like that. But are we supposed to talk about politics today?
Yes. On to the politics now. Let's go to our first crazy martini. And Jim, you and I generally have a very high regard for Ed Whalen. He clerked for Antonin Scalia. He's the author of Bench Memos for National Review Online. He carefully follows a lot of different issues related to confirmations and jurisprudence. He knows Brett Kavanaugh pretty well, a strong advocate for his confirmation. And he's letting it be known to a number of people in recent days that he thinks that within a week, Dianne Feinstein's going to be apologizing to Brett Kavanaugh. He didn't get too specific on what he thought would trigger that. And let's hope what he revealed on Thursday is not his ace in the hole here. Ed Whalen went on Twitter with this long thread claiming a mistaken identity issue and that Christine Ford was actually not assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh, but she may very well have been assaulted by a classmate of Kavanaugh's. And so what Ed did is he figured out who lived close to this pool where everybody had supposedly been before they went to whatever house they were at. And so he realized that most of the people already named here lived pretty far away from the pool, but he did find a classmate who lived fairly close, looked it up on Zillow, I guess, and found out that the floor plan closely resembles what Ford described in terms of the staircase and the bathroom being across the hall from the bedroom and so forth. And so then Ed decided to actually name the classmate who lived there at the time, essentially suggesting that this person might have committed sexual assault with no evidence other than a Google map. So he's now apologizing, saying, I made an appalling and inexcusable mistake of judgment in posting the tweet thread in a way that identified Kavanaugh's Georgetown prep classmate. I take full responsibility for that mistake, and I deeply apologize for it. I realize that does not undo the mistake. Jim, this is not only a pretty flimsy theory, so if he actually does have more evidence of Kavanaugh's innocence here, let's hope that it's stronger than what he offered on Twitter. But the idea that a guy usually as careful as Ed Whalen would just throw out the name of a possible sexual assault predator without really any evidence is stunning.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough. I've had a chance to chat with Ed a couple times at various National Review events, the cruises, stuff like that. And I can't emphasize enough, this is going to sound like a controversial statement this morning, but Ed Whalen is not a nut job. He's not the kind of guy who's going to tell you all about how the moon landing was faked and how there's a secret plot behind the Bermuda Triangle and out-of-body experiences and what his astrologer said. Ed Whalen, I would have ranked among, the top 10 most level-headed guys in Washington before yesterday. So when he hinted out earlier in the week of, Feinstein's going to be apologizing, he wasn't the kind of guy prone to bluster and bragging and, over-the-top rhetoric and stuff like that. The best and maybe most sympathetic explanation is that he's buddies with Kavanaugh. He's seeing his buddy get smeared with no evidence, and he's really mad as heck about it. And by golly, he goes out determined he's going to find something. Now, as time, went from that initial boast and the rumors that, Ed Whalen knows something, that the Kavanaugh team knows something. They got some bombshell that's going to change this whole thing. The more time that went by, I had this nagging doubt in the back of my head, Greg, and I realized I should have listened to it more under what I've long subscribed to on both sides and across the board in politics, Greg, is that people generally do not withhold evidence that is exculpatory. People do not hold back new information that makes them look good. So this idea of, they found something, as time went by, you're like, well, what are they waiting for? There's no perfect moment to just say, hey, here's information that shows that the other side is, being dishonest about me. But time went by. Whalen lays out his theory. And, conceivably plausible, I suppose, for what it's worth. Ford says, no, this is not the person she remembers attacking her. And I think putting not just the description and the photos and the name of the guy, absent any other evidence, is really irresponsible. And really it represents terrible judgment on Ed's part. And I say this is a guy who thinks highly of him and, probably is going to run across him at some point. And is just deeply disappointed by this. And the fact that he apologized this morning suggests that he at least recognizes the error of what he did. But the fact that somebody has a house that kind of fits the description she gave in that Washington Post article, and that he kind of looks like Kavanaugh. Maybe people who looked at those photos said, aha, they could be fraternal twins. Or maybe some folks, they both have brown hair. It's not enough to go out and say, oh, by the way, this person may have committed sexual assault. And he said, it's unfortunate that private citizens are being dragged into this, but this is all stems from Dianne Feinstein's actions. Look, I'm not going to dispute. I don't think there are too many people. I don't think there are too many Democrats who would dispute Dianne Feinstein handled this about as bad as humanly possible. The question is, what do we do in response to that? Do we say, no, we stand for a higher standard, we don't make accusations unless there's serious, credible evidence? Or do we say, oh, if you're going to do that, Feinstein, we're going to do it right back? Because this guy, this is apparently a teacher out somewhere in suburban Maryland, is not a political figure, is not a public figure, and he's just had his name dragged into this with an accusation up against him. Now, look, Ford denies it, says this is not the person who attacked her. But you got to feel for this guy, and you got to wonder what Ed was thinking. For what it's worth, Ed Whalen says that he did not coordinate with any of Kavanaugh's people, did not coordinate with Kavanaugh, did not coordinate with the White House on this. And I think that all of them can reasonably argue, what do you think, we're crazy? It's deeply frustrating to watch somebody you had a lot of respect for make such a glaring error. I'm glad Ed apologized. I'm glad he seems to recognize how much this completely backfired. But again, if we've been making this argument all week now, Greg, that we believe there should be a high standard for evidence, that you can't just make an accusation. You need to bring proof to the table. We can't embrace things like Ed Whalen's theory without completely renouncing everything we've been defending for the past week. And I think it just makes everybody look bad in this process. And it's arguably not even the craziest thing that's happened in the last 24 hours. And no, I'm not talking about the Jets.
All right, well, let's move on to Crazy Martini number 2 here. And for a number of days now, we've been speculating as to whether Dr. Ford would actually testify next week, because after her attorney came out on Monday and said, she's absolutely ready to tell her story and make sure that this is part of the deliberations for the Senate, all of a sudden that suddenly became a problem. And it sounded like she wouldn't come forward unless there was a full FBI investigation completed before then. And so that wasn't going to happen. The FBI says, and we've discussed that at length this week, that that's not what it does. It's not going to do that in this case. And so Chuck Grassley said, you got to let us know by 10 a.m. Friday, which we're now past, whether you're going to do this. So yesterday afternoon, the lawyers for Dr. Ford got in touch with the Senate Judiciary Committee, making a number of demands. And as we record this, we still don't know whether there's any agreement on her to actually testify. Here are some of the demands. She wants to testify second, meaning Kavanaugh has to appear first. So the accuser goes last, and the person does not have a chance to defend themselves against the accusations. Second, doesn't want Kavanaugh in the room at the same time with her. Third, prefers not to be questioned by outside counsel, but only by senators on the committee. Also, she would like the committee to subpoena Mark Judge, the other student Ford alleges to be in the room at the time of the assault, to testify. She also says each senator should have equal time questioning, which is already committee practice, no time limit on her opening statement, and will appear at a public hearing, but she would like to limit the number of cameras to pool coverage. So, Jim, that means she also says Monday's not an option, and usually these have to be announced a week ahead of time. So Thursday, I guess, maybe next Friday would be the earliest this could potentially happen. Grassley's been pretty firm on this. I'm sure he's going to push back on the order of testimony here, as well as perhaps some other issues, including who gets to ask the questions. What do you make of these demands by Dr. Ford?
I just want to remind everyone, Monday night, her lawyer said she was ready to testify. Monday night, her lawyer said she will do whatever is necessary to ensure the committee gets the full story. All of a sudden, everything changed. There are a couple, obviously, very reasonable requests on here. So reasonable, I'm surprised they're even on here. Provide adequate security. Of course, we don't just want anybody walking up to somebody who's testifying, right, Greg? Right, that Parkland father who came up to Kavanaugh. Can't have that. When she says only one pool camera, I would go one better and just say we shouldn't have cameras in this. And people can say, "Oh, Jim, you don't want people to see." Look, the claim from her and her legal team is that she's concerned about further loss of her privacy. There's right now, as we know, only one photo floating around over there. You know what? Let's not have cameras at all. You can bring her in through a back entrance or something like that. Keep the television cameras away. I think at the very least, the public needs to get a transcript of the testimony, and maybe you can do audio and you'd feel like that's not going to expose her to the entire world. Whatever works best for her. But I think basically if you want to eliminate grandstanding by senators and all that kind of stuff, I'd be fine. Let's take out the cameras. Want to waive the written statement? Fine. Same amount of time to talk. Look, my attitude would be ask questions until you're done. I don't see why you need any time limit for any of this stuff. But beyond that, the accused offers his memory and his version of events on one side, and then the accuser gets to go second to make sure that her accusation matches up with everything he says is not how it worked. It's not how it worked in legal cases. It's, Clarence Thomas followed Anita Hill. Mark Judge being subpoenaed, I don't think, look, you're a witness. You don't get to make demands. If Senate Democrats want to do that, that's fine. But I'm sorry, guys, you don't get to, dictate terms here. Same question on outside counsel. You don't get to decide who asks you questions. The committee gets to decide who asks you questions. If you don't want to get questions from outside counsel, you're free to not testify. But this is your opportunity to tell your story. I hope as heck you will do it. And the time delay, look, as of Monday, you said you were ready. We scheduled it Monday. You want to testify? Testify. You don't want to testify? You don't have to testify. This is not a contract negotiation, right? This is not a real estate deal. Okay, this is just basically you giving your version of events to the committee. If you don't want to partake of that opportunity, that's fine. I think it's very clear that most Republicans, just about all the Republican senators, are likely to ignore her claims or deem them not that credible if she decides she is not willing to repeat under oath under penalty of perjury what she has been willing to say in media interviews, Greg.
Yeah, I think the song and dance has really dampened any serious contemplation from Republicans on this. And you've seen all the Collins and Flake and Corker saying, look, let's just move on if she's not going to come and testify on Monday. And now it looks like she's not going to at least testify on Monday. And we'll see what Grassley agrees to. There's been reports out there that Grassley is not messing around with that. That's a quote from a staffer that is heavily paraphrased. And Mitch McConnell this morning, the Senate Majority Leader, I assume carefully wiping all the cocaine off before going to speak to the Values Voter Conference, says he is confident that Judge Kavanaugh will be confirmed in the very near future, Jim.
I do think that actually simply reflects a matter of the vote count. I did see yesterday that the governor and lieutenant governor of Alaska, who, oh, by the way, are in a tough fight for re-election, issued a statement saying that because of the prevalence of sexual assault in Alaska, they hope Alaska's Senator Lisa Murkowski will vote against the Kavanaugh nomination. I don't really get how Kavanaugh's confirmation or rejection will affect the sexual assault rates in Alaska. And if Alaska has really terrible sexual assault rates, Greg, that sounds like a job for the governor. Where have you been for the past 4 years? Isn't this the sort of thing you should be taking care of rather than, say, weighing in on a judicial nomination that you have no real legal authority over? So that's, seems to me like a guy who's just desperate and trying to create issues in his campaign. But anyway, Murkowski, if she does not testify, Murkowski strikes me as the only one who might even be wavering. The comments from Snow, Corker, Flake all indicate that they were very willing to give Ms. Ford their attention and their ears. They wanted to take her seriously. But if she won't testify, she won't testify. And that's that makes it much tougher for them to evaluate the credibility of her claims. And I think that just heightens the skepticism. So again, we will see. By the way, as we're speaking, I believe we're right around the deadline for her to submit written testimony. Now, I said I don't think that's nearly as necessary. I don't think the format of her testimony matters. I think it's almost a formality for most less emotionally charged congressional hearings. But at this point, as of this moment, it seems she's probably less likely to testify. I would say it's less likely she testifies than she does. And that's a really surprising turn of events, considering how this week started.
All right, Jim, let's move on to our third crazy martini now. And one of the things I think most Republicans and conservatives could be grateful for this week is that, kind of out of character on this issue, President Trump, for the most part this week, has kept his mouth shut, which is exactly the best thing he could have done. He's not exactly in a great position to be a character witness on this type of allegation, but now he's speaking out on Twitter, and this is what he had to say today. "I have no doubt that if the attack on Dr. Ford was as bad as she says, charges would have been immediately filed with local law enforcement authorities by either her or her loving parents. I ask that she bring those filings forward so that we can learn date, time, and place." And so, Jim, I think a lot of people are interested in the second half of that. If you actually have some details here, that would be kind of helpful. We've talked about we don't even really know what the jurisdiction is here or even what year this happened. But obviously the phrase that's going to get the lion's share of the criticism here, and already is that if the attack was as bad as she says, suggesting an attack might not be all that bad, I guess. But the more Trump just keeps his mouth shut, which I know is not his natural instinct, the better this is going to be for everyone.
One of the things that had made this week so odd and surreal is that we had this highly charged, angry, emotional dispute and public debate about an allegation of sexual misconduct. And it really had nothing to do with President Trump. and that up until this morning, he really hadn't weighed in very much other than to make a simple and appropriate remark that, she should be listened. It would be best if she testified and the committee heard from her, but that he has full faith in Kavanaugh. And, there was a headline, I believe it was on CNN, that really sounded like something out of The Onion. It was something along the lines of like, White House staff in stunned silence as Trump issues appropriate remarks. We've just gotten so used to him saying the worst possible thing, and immediately 4 days he held out. And I suppose we should give him a little bit of credit for that, but he undid it today. I mean, out of all the parts of, look, we don't know what happened to Miss Ford, but certain elements of her story, you could say, have the ring of plausibility, and perhaps no part more believable than the fact that a 15-year-old girl was terrified of admitting what had happened, admitted she'd gone to the party, admitted she drank, wondering if people would believe her, and just deciding to bury it deep and pretend it didn't happen, and trying to deal with it that way. Women who've been through those kinds of experiences, some women say that's how they deal with it. A teenager who's just had an experience like that, very believable that she would not want to tell it. So what's interesting is that Trump has to weigh in. Doesn't weigh in on the lack of location, doesn't weigh in on the lack of date, doesn't weigh in on the other gentlemen who were allegedly present who say they have no memory of this. No. He's got to go after the one part of the story that sounds most plausible. Deeply frustrating. Just the way the day is going, Greg, that he had to go off and do this. I do kind of wonder, though, up until now, we had not seen a terribly strong public response to this allegation. There only been a little bit of polling, and I believe it was Huffington Post that had the number of people who said they believed Ford's accusations were in the low to mid 30s. And a lot of people said they didn't know what to think yet. A lot of people seem to be ready to reserve judgment. CNN did a focus group of 5 women. 4 of the 5 said they did not believe the accuser. I think it's safe to say it's not the reaction CNN was expecting to get here. Now, once Trump jumps in, things turn into a referendum on Trump. And we've seen this on issue after issue of what do you think of Russia? What do you think of border security? What do you think of trade sanctions and stuff like that, or tariffs? When you ask the question, you get one result. When you say, what do you think of Trump's position on this? All of a sudden, the opposition jumps up higher. Meaning there are some people who are just hardwired. The moment they hear Trump, whatever Trump's position is, they oppose it. If he says the sky is blue, they'll say, no, the sky is green. So if Trump jumps in attacking this accuser, that's probably exactly what this accuser wanted. This is probably exactly the reaction the Democrats wanted, because of the belief that it will shift public opinion against him. Deeply, deeply frustrating that it came to this, and that I don't think this really changes the calculus on the Senate vote and stuff like that. But it's being set up for a, mean, nasty male Republicans don't take sex assault seriously, don't listen to victims. They put out the bait and Trump took it, and we'll see what the ramifications of that are. But 4 days of self-control was all we could expect, I guess, Greg.
Actually, more than I expected. Jim, have a great weekend. We're going to need the rest. This was supposed to be the ugly week. It might be next week, or at least uglier. Have a good weekend.
Hey, we're just 2 days away from Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Have a great weekend, everyone, and join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.